Okay, guys, welcome to another session of Reef Therapy. I'm Jeremy Gay, and I'm here today with Shane Danger Coleman from Sustainable Reefs down in Cairns, Australia. Thanks for coming on, Shane.
No worries at all. Glad to be here.
Um, Thank you. Yeah, there's a bit of a lag. I've actually I'm hot desking in my local aquarium store today to get a better internet connection, but we seem to have chosen each other from like opposite parts of the planet, so we're quite a distance away. So hopefully in the recording, all this lag will catch up. But when we talk, there's going to be a few seconds between the sound coming through. So hopefully it will still record okay. Okay, so just tell us a bit about yourself then, Shane. You're a coral farmer by trade, and just tell us a bit about sustainable reefs and coral essentials.
Yeah, well, my background is engineering and fabrication, and I did that for I guess probably maybe 15 years or so. And reefing was my hobby, and that's what kept me sane. And about 4 years ago, I got an opportunity to move up from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland to Cairns in Queensland. It's about 19 hours north, to give you a bit of scope, and that's 19 good fast hours. So it's a pretty big state. Australia is huge. So moved into the tropics and taken a job coral farming, and yeah, it's been really good, and it's impacted my hobby quite a lot because it's taken me until about 2 weeks ago that I've actually wanted to have an aquarium again. I haven't really had that desire to keep an aquarium in the house somewhere, whilst I'm working with them all day and almost every day. So, but yeah, last week I decided that I'll set it up again. It's coming back. But in the meantime, I've been keeping busy with other avenues of salt water, but just not so much the reef aquarium that everyone knows.
So just tell us a bit about sustainable reefs, what it is, what it does, your role there, and a bit about coral essentials.
The job I took, it was Sustainable Reefs. It's a coral farm. We don't have anything to do with wild collection now as much as I really like wild collection. And I would love to actually get out and do some wild collection on with others at some point. I still get out into the natural reef. I'm actually going out to the reef tomorrow. It's going to be quite heavy rain, but we're going out tomorrow, just recreationally. But the coral farm runs entirely off propagation, and so we just propagate and make copies of everything. And that's been running for I think 8 years, and I've been there for four, the last four. And the coral farm serves as a research and development facility for Coral Essentials, which is a product line of supplements, basically. So we develop and test them on the farm and then send them out to consumers once we know that it's growing corals really well.
So how does that work with so you're not wild collecting any more corals then, or very few. How does that affect your collection? There must be a need to refresh perhaps sometimes, or a desire to refresh, all these nice species that are out on the reef. How does that work?
Yeah, definitely. And even while we were collecting, so what we were predominantly specializing in Acropora when we were wild collecting, but we could collect other species, but we were specializing in Acropora. Um, but whilst we were wild collecting, I was still buying corals from LFS. I'd buy them from other collectors, and we still have quite a few collectors that we're really good friends with, and we we buy just one-off pieces, specifically for the color or the species or both. There's still a whole lot of species on my wish list to complete the Noah's Ark of coral farms to make sure we've got enough of the mother colonies to be able to make it completely sustainable. So we still buy a few wild colonies here and there, especially if it's a different color variation of something that we don't have yet. Uh, And yeah, there are a few species that I'm still targeting as well that are just a little bit on the rare side or hard to propagate. So we're still in the process of learning how to propagate them that doesn't involve spawning because yeah, it's a different ball game.
So that was going to be my next question, actually. So obviously you're collecting these corals. Some are easier to propagate than others. I mean, are there any that? I mean, I don't know anyone who propagates acanthophilia or trachophilia. Is that something you can do, or?
Oh, I lost a bit of audio there. I think you said cataphilia. Um, if you
Yeah.
did, I have got cataphilia down pat. I can cut those up into really small pieces, and they're coming back. Probably about a 4 to 6 month turnaround on cataphilia frags, and that's cut down from little tiny pieces like that, and that comes up to a sort of a 30 mil disc size in 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, it wasn't casophilia. It was acanthophilia and
Oh yeah,
trachophilia. Is that
yeah.
something you can propagate, or?
Yeah, those two. Yeah, trichophilia are actually a little bit harder than acanthophilia or the deshies. But yeah, deshies, they're down pat. They take around about probably a year bare minimum from a frag to a grown out frag, which the skeleton has then become circular, not just the flesh. The skeleton itself is circular around about a year at bare minimum, but usually a bit longer, around the 18-month mark is that. Um, Trachophilia, I'm having a little bit of success with, but the time frames, they're just not viable unless I can figure out how to really speed them up. But they do frag, they do heal, but I've had some sitting there for probably 3.5 years now, and I still wouldn't call them ready.
Wow, that's not a very quick turnaround, is it?
No, it doesn't make it worth the time doing it. So,
It's funny we're talking about Aussie corals, and I'm here in the UK, and at the moment we've got an import ban on Queensland corals, and
yeah,
it's funny how you kind of you don't know what you miss until you can't get it, and when Indonesia was banned. We really missed Indo and the torches, and now that Australia's banned and Indo's back, I'm so desperate for some Queensland. Bower Bankais and micro lords and scollies and all those things that I just took for granted that now I'm just like, oh, I wish I could get them.
yeah. It's going to be a little while until I'm not actually I'm not entirely clued up on what's going on in the background there at the moment. I was a little while ago, but I've kind of let it all slip away because I haven't been involved in the export, especially to the UK. I don't think we've done an export to the UK in quite a while, so I've kind of followed up on a lot of that. But I would say it would be a while before the EU or UK as well start allowing some corals once the scientists have proven that it is sustainable at certain numbers and that because our quota catch limits for the wild collection companies, they've been dramatically cut, and then some of it's been quite unwarranted. Like I think Duncan Ops got a slashing of numbers, but I've dove plenty of spots out in the reef, and there's football fields of the stuff. It's not risk it. It's not at risk at all. It's one of the most abundant corals on the reef. It's really silly. So some of the scientists that do these studies just maybe just pluck numbers out of the air and yeah, I don't know. But yeah, some species could be at risk of overcollection or natural risks.
Sure. So let's talk about saltwater plants. We discussed topics briefly via Messenger before you came on, and this one is interesting. So obviously this lag's a bit of an issue. So I'm just going to let you take the floor for the next kind of 10 minutes or so. Just tell us about saltwater plants. I mean, are we talking seagrasses? Are we talking macroalgae? If you could tell us a bit about where they grow, how they grow, whether we can have them in the aquarium, good things, bad things. I'm just going to let you take it away.
Yeah, so as I was saying before, when I moved up to Cairns to take this job, I kind of lost a lot of I'll say interest. No, it's not. It's not the right word, but I lost interest for reef aquariums because I was working with it all the time. But I found interest in other saltwater things, and one of those things was saltwater plants. And what I mean by that is like the mangroves and things. And everyone's heard of mangroves. And there's Julian Sprung. He's made the mangroves famous, and he takes them to all of the reef stocks and the Macnas, and he's got tubs and he's got ponds, and they're beautiful. But living up here and down from where I was down the Sunshine Coast and the other end of Queensland, there was all of these plants that I kept seeing around estuaries and beaches as well, that I'm looking at them and going, they're pretty much growing in salt water. Why can't like this reef aquarium hobby is so fascinated with mangroves? I'm sure you've seen all those old photos with people putting those mangroves in their sump, and they don't do much. They grow 3 leaves and then die. But I see all these other shrubs, grasses, little bushes, succulents, and there's quite a few. So I currently have 12 species of completely 35-part salinity in my pond downstairs. There's 12 species that are, 11 that are not mangroves. And there's grasses. There's a succulent which is edible. It's called Sesuvium, and it's probably in a lot of your gardens already. Well, the genus. But yeah, Sesuvium porticolustum, and it's edible. It's a little bit crunchy. I actually snap some off here and there and put them in salads. They're great. But yeah, my favorite is mangrove holly, and it looks exactly like the holly leaves, the Christmas ones that are spiky. And it produces a really beautiful purple flower, and on that flower it produces a seed pod. They grow from cuttings. They're really cool. So I started doing some coastal revegetation projects around Cairns in the areas with another crew. Like, as in, I didn't spearhead the idea. It wasn't me at all. It was just me volunteering to do it. So getting out there and digging holes and planting these plants. Got in contact with the botanists and the horticulturists that were growing these plants, and managed to get a few extras for my home project. And they were really interested to see that I was growing them in full salt water and not just salt marsh brackish areas. So I have this fiberglass pond downstairs, and it was originally going to be a part of a larger reef build that I lost interest in. And now it's just become this bit of a swamp. It's a bit hard on here to do without photos, but it's Black Box Reef on Facebook. It's a Facebook page. There's photos there if you want to see them, and there's a few species names listed and stuff if you're interested in seeking out some of these species. I'm not too sure how you mentioned if they were good or bad for the aquarium. I'm not too sure if they do remove nutrients. I assume that they do, but just like mangroves, they don't remove anything that's noticeable or worthwhile. Like, if you're putting a mangrove in your system for the purpose of removing nutrients, it isn't going to work. They don't do it. It's ornamental. So I've dropped my thoughts on Black Box Reef about keeping mangroves and other plants in there. And yeah, so check it out if you want. It's kind of just like a diary. I don't really keep up with it too much, but yeah, that's where you'll find some photos of this pond that I'm talking about. So yeah, that's about the saltwater plants. It just keeps me interested.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was going to ask you about the potential, obviously, with lots of terrariums and paludariums and the kind of saltwater potential for that, but also as nutrient uptake. And you kind of answered my question there. Mangroves are slow, as we know. You may as well just use, Ketomorpha. Yeah. And the same question with the terrestrial plants. But also, do you think there's any risk of this kind of allelopathy, this kind of, them actually releasing things that could be harmful to corals?
That is one of the next steps that I want to take. Once I have, how I just spoke about before, with this new aquarium that I'm going to set up, I'm in deciding whether I want to link them together or not and have this pond as a refugium of sorts. But whether I do or don't, I will put corals into that pond and just see what's going on. I know the nutrients in that pond are absolutely disgusting. Like when you tip a reagent sachet for Hana phosphate, the water turns deep, dark navy blue. So it's yeah, very, very nutrient rich in that pond. um, but yeah,
Yeah,
I can
definitely.
see how there would be a potential for telepathy in there because one of those species produces a milk, like when you snap the leaves. So it could be toxic to fish, snails. I don't know. So for the purpose of
Yeah.
reef keeping, I don't recommend to go and throw these plants in your reef because they aren't really reef tested. I've only tested them for salt. There are turbo snails.
Yeah.
There are, so the ones I
Yeah.
have so far work with turbo snails. That's about it.
Yeah, it's about working your way up the complexity of life form, isn't it, for
Yeah.
tolerance to and what you want to risk it on. But snails, you start with like copepods or something like that. And,
Yeah.
right, okay, the pods are alive. Okay, next step. So yeah, yeah, brilliant. So what about kind of true aquatic plants? I mean, have you got any experience with seagrasses down there? I mean, can you tell us a bit about that?
Um, I would like to put some seagrass into that pond. But as far as I know, we've got some pretty crazy regulations in Queensland as for the collection of seagrasses, and I don't know of anyone doing revegetation of seagrass, and that's how I got the plants that I do have through like legitimate channels of people growing these plants for the purpose of revegetation on like um, old cane farming land and things like that. That they're being reclaimed and vegetated back out to be back what it was. I don't know of anyone doing seagrass, so I haven't bothered with it. But I would imagine seagrass would be pretty similar to Calliope taxifolia in terms of the way that it grows. Like I've not intentionally pulled up chunks of it down at the mud flats. It is down there at the beach or the mud flats, but it does have roots and runners that are very similar to Calliope taxifolia. So I would imagine it would be very similar to grow, but I haven't yet. I'd like to.
Okay, and just while we're on that subject, could you tell us a bit about the sorts of corals that are found in seagrass? I've got an inkling, but perhaps you could clear a few things up. Is that it's quite a specific habitat? So are there certain species of corals that are just found there?
Yeah, there's so Trachophilia are one of them. You can find up in the shallow water, and it's what else have I found in there? Potentially Dash, but they're usually a little bit deeper. So you'll get Dash, Sinarina, and Trachophilia on Halimeda beds. So the Halimeda is a calciferous algae, and you usually get that around about 15 to 20 meters and deeper. And wherever you find Halimeda, you'll usually find those other chunkier, meatier corals. But the shallow, knee deep, and up to sort of head height water, that's where you can find trackies in the shallow water. It's often really muddy, really dirty, but that's something that I always like to point out that whilst it's muddy and dirty and you might not be able to see right in front of you, it doesn't mean the water is actually bad quality. It's just actually rich with food. So that gives us an indication of what that coral actually likes, because the food particles in the water, it's just rich with nutrients, like not nutrients like nitrate and phosphate. So we can't go and say this coral likes dirty water, so I could be a lazy reefer. It doesn't work like that. It's rich with food. Yeah. But the actual quality of the water is really good.
Interesting. So let's go on to coral farming. Obviously, you said you don't want to go down the spawning route, and I completely get that, and that some species are slower and basically not commercially viable. Viable. So, what can you tell us about coral farming? I mean, what is the kind of state of the Aussie coral farming industry at the moment versus, say, Indonesia, and where, what are your kind of past, present, and future kind of inputs with to do with the farming of Australian corals?
Probably one of the hardest things that I've encountered to do with coral farming is actually predicting what's popular or what I need to have extra stock of, because like even predicting when international customers are going to order, because like I'll have a run on war coral, the Favites pentagona. There'll be just a bunch of people ordering it, and then I'll go, oh right, so I'll get all my mother colonies and I'll butcher them all out and make hundreds of frags, and then they sit there. So I've done numerous things like that, and certain zoanthids or just heaps of corals. It's just the rates in which people craze over a certain strain of coral is ridiculous, and it makes this job really difficult to keep up with. So that I don't frag too much or frag too little. It's a bit painful like that. But or you can get rid of reduced numbers of certain strains of coral when they've just been sitting there. They're all grown onto the egg crates and they look terrible. Well, they look good. They've really grown well, but they don't look presentable as a frag because you've got to break it off the egg crate. It's still jagged. So you reduce those, and then the week afterwards you get an order for 50 of them and you go, really? But yeah, that's about the most difficult thing about in coral farming. But otherwise, I love it. It's really good. It's picking up in Australia. I could pretty confidently say that Sustainable Reefs was the largest operation of fragging that doesn't collect or wild collect. There are plenty of people around that are fragging corals and small operations. There's lots of shops that have prop rooms, like Galleria Portico is one of my favourite aquariums in Australia. They do a lot of propagation in-house. And then there's other collectors that are starting. It's really catching on, which is fantastic. I love seeing it. It's been the future for a long time, and we've been saying it for a long time, and it's finally catching on that propagation or fragging or just any type of the betterment of corals that doesn't involve 100% relying on wild corals is the future. There will still be times, or I still think there's going to be species that won't be able to be propagated on a commercial scale, so they'll either fade out and drop out of the hobby, so they'll either be like financially unattainable for most people, so their presence just drops off in the hobby,
Sure.
or they just simply won't be collected anymore, if especially if collection's ever banned, which I hope it's not, because there's a lot of species that I don't think is going to be possible to keep up the demand.
Yeah, it's interesting from a retail point of view. I've done kind of import and wholesale, and it's pretty two dimensional in that these days people just want colour and movement. People want the torches, they want the scollies, they want the barrel banker, they want the fleshy, colourful stuff. And sometimes with frags of stuff that doesn't move, like Favites or various chalices, etc., it can be a difficult sell if it's not like a really popular name variety, and it can be frustrating for guys like yourself and myself when you just kind of like, okay, I'm guessing you just want the colourful moving stuff, and they're like, yeah, that's what I want. To the detriment of everything else that gets covered in algae and valonia, and like you say, just sticks to the egg crate over time.
Like, I've got some corals there that no one even knows the name of. They're that rare. Some of them just super rare species or super rare colour strains. And then someone will take a green star polyps, like that spreading leather mat. They'll take that over it. And I'm like, are you kidding? And it's, I'm offering you something that literally no one else in Australia and possibly the world has. And no, I'll take star polyps. It's silly, but
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, and the can you tell us a bit about the Great Barrier Reef as well? I've never been. Obviously, Jake did frequently, and well, a couple of times at least. And so, why are you based in Cairns, and why are these suppliers based in Cairns? Is it because of the infrastructure? Is that where the airports are for shipping corals out, or is that like the coral hotspot?
Yeah, so well, the Great Barrier Reef uh, basically starts pretty much at the top of Queensland, and Cairns is actually still only about 2/3 of the way up from the bottom of Queensland. So there's still a lot of Queensland above me right now. So there's a lot of reef north, and there's about the same distance north as there is south. So Cairns is pretty much in the middle of the reef, but then you've got other hotspots down off Mackay, which you've probably heard that name kicking around. So that's a city on the coast a little bit further south, and that town there is where a lot of the boats go or the collectors live that target Scollies. And a lot of ACAN comes out of there as well, and a little bit further south for ACAN. So, well, Micromusa. So Cairns is a hotspot because, yes, it has an airport. Mackay has an airport. They are regional, small town airports, but so that is one reason. But also, Cairns, we have the reef. It's about a half an hour drive in the boat. So other areas like Mackay, you've got to travel for about an hour to get to the reef, to where it's good. So that is one of the reasons why Cairns exists or why Cairns is a thing for coral collectors.
And I know you're a farmer, not a collector, but can you give us some insight into the frequency of these colourful corals, like Scollies, Homophilia australis? I mean, are they abundant? Are they sporadic? Do you have to travel a long way? Does it? I mean, how long would it take for someone to collect 20 colourful, appealing Homophilia australis?
So yeah, if I was diving off, because I have done a fair bit of wild collection previously with another company in part time when I used to live down the Sunshine Coast, and then when I moved up here, we were wild collecting at least twice a month. So finding for the frequency of a scully, to use that as an example, diving down there off Mackay, you would probably swim over 50 scollies to be able to find one, like bleeding apple or master or those Superman ones, the red and the blue. They're actually more hard to come by than a master grade, the red and the blue Superman style. But if you probably brought back, like, if in a single dive, like on a no deco dive, so around about 20-25 minutes at the depths that we were down there, it's probably bringing back about 30-40 scollies or so, and that's of all different grades. You might get one or two masters in that, and that then you've got to go do your stop at the top, and then you're allowed to dive again later in the day. So it's the diving and the intervals, because you can't stay down all day. It's not like going to pick flowers. You have to dive safely, which means that the time that you have to collect is limited. But to be able to find the scollies, they are quite difficult. They're often in like really tall sargassum weed. It's a type of macroalgae that grows all over the bottom of the rocks there. So you'd be like sifting through weed and other corals. It isn't at all like a shopping aisle and you just pick them off the edge. Yeah, they are. You do have to look and search and swim upside down and look under ledges and sift through stuff to actually search things out.
And when I've received Aussie Scollies in the past, Queensland Scollies, sometimes they are collected as like a double. You get like a larger one and then another one kind of behind it at 45 degrees. And then recently we covered a story on the site about propagating them by cutting the kind of underside off and doing them that way. What's your
Yeah.
experience of propagating scollies?
So that where they grow on the underside is kind of just an accident. Like it's when you're trimming the scollies on the saws, because you got to get rid of the shipping, the excess rock, and then so you trim that off in the saw. And if the scully, the inside of the mouth, where the down to the bottom of the septa, if that's quite deep, it's quite often that the collector will trim it off really shallow, and there's a flesh hangs out the bottom. And when it's sitting on the egg crate in the holding facility, especially if it's sitting in the holding facility for quite a while, or it gets shipped straight away and then it sits in the shop for quite a while, well, that flesh and the mouth that hangs through the bottom will actually just regrow another one on the other side. But unless it's grown skeleton, and if you stand it up on the side and you've got a scully this side and a scully this side, you will get them. Say the small one that's growing off the bottom is on this side. Unless it's growing a skeleton, it's not a propagation method. It's just another piece of flesh on the other side. It needs to physically grow outward away so you can cut down there again and cut it off. And it's not a propagation method at all until it actually grows skeleton. Those ones that have just got a piece on the back, you have to stand it up like that or lay it down and kill the one on the bottom. But yeah, I reckon you'd be waiting at least a year and a half for that to grow a significant amount of skeleton to push away from the old cut site. The propagation method that I use for scollies is cutting them like a pizza. I've been doing it for many years. I've got some Gen 3 scollies now that have done like that. So that is, the original scolly was cut into 8, and now all of those frags grew out, and then I cut one of those, or cut those again into another 6 or 8 pieces, and now they're growing out. So that's been a long process. And I do have some of the ones where I've cut them too shallow by accident and it's grown off the bottom. And I have them sitting out there at Sustainable Reefs, and I have them standing up on the side, and I feed both sides, and I'm trying to get that skeleton to grow. It's slow. It's really slow. So, to be a propagation method, you need skeleton.
That's really interesting. And have you ever attempted, I know lots of people have, these grafted scollies where you cut 2 in half and put them together? Does that work, Shane?
I may have been the first one to try it. I don't know. There's been a few ages ago. I've got some like 2014 and 2016 screenshots of trying it, and no, it doesn't work. I would love it to.
No, I didn't think it did.
Yeah, I would love it too. It was, I've tried it with like just half and half. I've tried it with multiples all around. I've got like cut 8 different scollies up and then put one of each different 8. The best you get is all of the pieces individually healed, and then you just got like, so they're a half, and then they just turn into 2 singles side by side.
I see. And the pizza method, is that, could you use it on Cinerina and on Adeptophilia?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I cut my Cinerina into either 6 or 8, depending on the size. If you've got a small Cinerina skeleton and a big one right beside each other, you'll know why I do that. Scully, exactly the same. Cinerina, exactly the same. 6 or 8, that's the pieces. Some, like, if it's really, really small, like the skeleton, I wouldn't bother fragging it. But if you just really have to cut it, you just have to cut it into 4 if the skeleton's like quite small. You just got to keep the flesh size quite a lot. But yeah, the actual act of cutting these corals isn't that groundbreaking. Like well, to some it might be, but cutting these corals isn't really groundbreaking in terms of they all frag. Like corals frag, they break. Their tissue, they can regenerate from just a few cells. Like there's the phoenix effect in fungi. Like there's there's nothing there, and then there's fungi all over it. So the what I take to be the trick to fragging these difficult to frag or seemingly impossible to frag corals is all about the aftercare. It's what you do after you cut it. And it all comes down to water quality and feeding.
Sure.
Amino acids, vitamins, and good water quality with low nutrients. That's the trick.
Okay, so just on that, I've got a couple of questions then. After I take it you use like a diamond blade saw, like a griffin saw, something like that to cut these corals. Do you use any kind of antibacterial agents to stop infection afterwards? Is that a thing in farming? Is that a myth? Do you use anything to help them repair? And then my second question, species like scollies, do you feed them? Do you feed them pellets as well? Is that it's kind of opinion is divided on whether or not you should feed scollies. Of course, you get this amazing feeding response, but do you feed these large solitary LPS corals? Do you feed them on pellets?
There's so the as for the dip, the iodine or antibacterials. So I'll start there. If it's a brand new coral that I've just say bought from Galleria Aquatica, and they've sent it back up to me or sent it to me, and I'm going to put it into our system. 100%, I dip it. I dip everything that's brand new because I don't know where it's been. But in my saws that I use a Griffon or Griffin or however you want to say it, I used to put, and I still sometimes do, put a little bit of Ki3, the potassium iodide. Julian, CCAM Reef dip is another one that I've used in the past. Just the iodine-based dip I used to. But more often than not, I don't. And it's because if you're dipping a coral, so let's just say I pull it out of this tank here, I bring it over to my saw, and I'm washing or killing bacteria, but then I'm putting those frags straight back in that tank there. If there was bacteria on it, they're in that tank already. So there's no point in dipping it. It's just more stress for the coral. So 9 times out of 10, I do not dip or use iodine for fragging, for the purpose of fragging. I don't think it helps them heal quicker. I actually kind of tested this a little while ago. It was only on Monty though. I think you guys call it cherry tree, Monty. And I got 80 frags from our mother colony. And I tested 8 different dips and a control. No, sorry, 7 different dips and a control. The control had no dip. And every single one of them healed exactly the same and they were all fine. But that's just Monty. Like, if I was to really step out and say dips do nothing post-fragging, I would want to test that on quite a few species before I put my name to that. But in general, I just don't use it because if you're taking it out of a system that it's growing and it's healthy, well, it shouldn't have diseases or bacteria on it. But yes, from other systems, always dip. And then for the aftercare of fragging scollies, for example, they basically, if you cut them like a pizza, they don't have the ability to feed because you've cut their mouth up. There's nothing there to feed. So you've got to make the mouth grow back. And to make the mouth grow back and all the gut and everything that it needs to digest food, you need amino acids. So amino acids are basically like the bricks in your house that build the proteins. And the proteins build the cells. And the cells build the mouth and the gut. So you need to add the aminos, and then the vitamins are basically what the coral uses to either synthesize their own aminos that we're not dosing, or stick the amino acids together to make the cells. So the amino acids and vitamins, that was really basic and loose then. But basically you need to be dosing those 2 things, amino acids and vitamins, to get the mouth and the gut to heal. Once it's healed, I always dose powdered food. I used to be a big advocate for like so many years ago, you used to hear like put a chunk of prawn or shrimp, depending on where you are, in it.
Yeah.
How many times have you seen that coral just spit it out? Or you
Every
feed
time. Yeah.
yeah,
It always
yeah.
spits it out eventually.
Every time. Every single time. How many times have you put a few piles of pellets in a scully and they just gone? It's all covered in slime, but gone.
Yeah.
If you feed really, really small amounts of a powdered food, which CE is just releasing one. I was actually just filming videos for it today. But just like reefroids, just like there's a heap of them. Gonio power, I love that. That's just incredible. I've spoken to him at length about that. It's one of my favorite powdered foods. But the fine powder foods seem to be digested a lot easier. So in the last couple of years, after being an advocate of feeding pellets and everything, I've gone away from it. I can still feed pelletized food, but I don't keep it as pellets. I grind it into a paste and then feed a paste because then I don't seem to spit them out as much. So that's my take on feeding. And I've had a lot of success now using a powdered food or paste.
And while we're on the subject of scullies, I saw a video that you made a while back about like a worm, a burrowing worm in the skeleton, I think it was. Can you tell us a bit about that? What's the likelihood of wild collected scullies having these worms in the skeleton?
Very. And it's not just scullies. It's basically all corals, all stony corals, and even live rock. Like I've had these. Well, they don't last too long on live rock, but in the bay, they're called a lithophaga, and it's a mussel. They've got a hard shell. They're a mollusk. They live inside. They use an acid.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, they use an acid to secrete. They secrete this acid, and it dissolves the skeleton and makes a cavity inside the bottom of the coral. And then around the top of the mouth part of this mussel, they basically feed off the coral slime. So they irritate the coral, and they make it slime, and then they feed off the slime. And while that coral is busy trying to remake slime and heal, like kind of like it's putting energy into creating slime that it doesn't need to when it could be putting its energy into growing. So you'll see over time,
sure,
these mussels just deplete the energy. They're like a little parasite. They sap all the energy off the coral. But if you find it and get it out, the coral, you can be feeding your coral aminos, vitamins, you can give it food, you can give it light, you can give it the perfect water quality, but it's not actually healing or growing faster than the energy that it takes to rebuild the slime and the tissue that this little stupid mussel is taking out. So I always cut, and that's one of the reasons why collectors cut all the coral bases off, because if we're getting the pests out of them. We trim all the excess rock from the outside, we trim them back really hard, because we don't want those pests in there. Another reason is because also if they die in the bag, they go stinky and then it kills the coral. So if you trim the excess off from a wild coral, it ships really nice.
Okay, that's really interesting to know. And something else we were talking about previous to this session was habitats on the reef, and you said something really cool about gonies and runoff and manganese and that sort of thing. Can you tell us a bit about that, Shay?
Yeah, so like reef habitats kind of mimic things that we can do in our reef that make the coral itself, or sorry, it makes more sense that the coral grows there because there's an abundance of it. So, for example, around one of the zones where acans and goniopora or goniopora, or however you want to say it, is commonly collected. There's a lot of rivers.
You're right,
runoff.
I'm wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a million different ways, yeah. The American pronunciation of acropora spins me out every time. The acropora, it's like, what? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so around all these zones, around Gladstone and a classic area, there's these runoff from these rivers around the area, and that central Queensland coastline is full of red dirt, and it is iron and manganese rich dirt.
Rich in iron, I presume.
So it's coming off into the rivers, and all of where these gonnies and these acans or micromucil, where they're all found, is near the river mouth. So when we've played with elevating levels of manganese, especially, iron's a bit funny because you can stuff up other stuff with it. But when you play with that, we've had really cool success with gonny and micromucil. There's other corals, like I mentioned this one to you in chat earlier, was the Microlados, so your classic strawberry shortcake acro. Where you find that, I've had it, when we've wild collected it, I've had a wave that's 2 meters tall dump on top of my back and smash my face into the reef because the water's only like that deep. That's where they grow. So they're like crashing waves. Wow. It's high energy, and the oxygen and the bubbles that's created from that. That's how do you replicate that in a reef? That's why a lot of people seem to have a lot of trouble keeping that wild strawberry shortcake color. Like, I don't know anyone that has wild strawberry shortcake color. It just doesn't happen. It always goes dark green and pink.
Exactly, neither do I, and that's interesting because when we used to ship it, it ships really badly as well because the transit time from UK to Australia is so long, and that just makes perfect sense about the oxygen. You know, the corals that would ship the worst were wild Australian strawberry shortcake. You'd open the bag, you get that kind of sweet and sour kind of, you know what it's like, dead acro smell, and it was always the strawberry shortcake. So that tells me a huge amount straight away.
But yeah, that and spathulata as well. Spathulata is usually found a little bit on the inside of reefs, like in lagoons. So the strawberry shortcake's right on the crashing waves, and then your spathulata goes a little bit further inland or in reef. And they're usually a little bit more sheltered, but the water itself is still only like a meter and a half deep at most. So they're getting belted with light. And they've got a lot of high oxygen washing off the top of that reef into those lagoons. So, but yeah, there's where we find those species. If I had the time, I'd love to sit down one day, and it'd be pretty broad, but you could give a good indication of like how certain things are found. Like, your trackies and stuff, they love food because they're found in this sediment-rich, not sediment like dirt, but it's like planktons and stuff that have all washed out of rivers. So, yeah, where we find these corals is a good indication of how we can keep them better. Corals do adapt, but to get that real peak health, there's definitely some things that we can learn from Mother Nature.
Now, that's really interesting. That the store I'm in now, I'm hot desking in my my LFS for their internet, and they're called Bursco Aquatics, and I help out there. And we definitely prescribe manganese for gonnies quite a lot. So it's good that I've got yourself who can kind of back that up, because it was, for us, it was almost kind of anecdotal. We were like, you know, 5 of the guys that dose manganese do better with gonnies than 5 of the guys who don't. So, you know, we just kind of prescribe that, and that's really interesting to know.
And it's manganese is a really weird element too. Like, it's, I'll say this now: don't chase numbers with it. Like, if you see, I don't know, whatever ICP you choose to use, you'll see their target value. Don't chase it. You'll never hit it. Well, you could, but you'll probably poison your tank. So just be dosing to have the element there. That element is so sensitive to light and violet.
Everyone has low manganese on ICP.
Yeah, it's always low, and it's because it's sensitive to light, and we pump out aquariums with lights. It's sensitive to processes in the corals, and it just gets depleted so quickly. So you could probably tailor yourself a really high dose that's dispersed over the day, but it's a risky thing to do. So I always just suggest to dose so that it's there, not chase that number. If you see the recommended dose on your ICP result to dose X amount of milliliters to bring it up to this level, and you do it, I reckon by the end of the day, you can take another sample and it's gone. Like it's a weird element.
Yeah.
Very necessary, but weird. So yeah, just dose minimal amounts, so it's just always there.
And would manganese be a factor for the Bernard Pora as well? The small polyp gonny, is that something you have down there?
Possibly. So the Bernard Pora is usually found on outer reefs, usually on like reef slopes, kind of vertically. But yeah, I don't think I've ever found a Bernard Pora inshore like where you'd find gonnies. It's not to say they don't exist there, but most that I've ever found were always out.
So they could actually come from different habitats and have different requirements, even though us kind of lay aquarists kind of treat them the same way. We treat them as gonny in inverted commas.
Yeah. Well, they definitely. Well, they're not gonny. That's yeah. But as for just looking similar, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, they as far as I know, they come from quite different areas. So, but I don't know whether that translates. I know some people have problems with Bernard Pora. I know my grow system currently at Sustainable Reefs, because we've got a few different systems there, and what I call my system because it's full of the LPS and the squishy stuff. I'm having a little bit of sulky Bernard Pora over the last couple of months, but whereas Christian, my boss, he's got his system's more dedicated to SPS, and his Bernard Pora are growing off the plugs and onto the egg crate. So when a customer orders Bernard Pora, it's coming out of his system now. But yeah, until I figure out what's going on with mine, it's just sulky, not dying or anything. It's just weird.
You might be able to clear something up for me while we're on the subject of runoff and rivers. Can you tell me about that river torch, the gold torch that's meant to be in kind of river outlets or estuarine waters? Can you clear that up for us?
I haven't heard of that one. I yeah.
There's an Aussie gold torch type that comes through that the urban myth in the UK is that it comes from brackish waters and that's why no one can keep it. Gold Aussie torch for us are more difficult to maintain long term than Indo Aussie gold torch. I'm just wondering, I think you've got some experience with Aussie gold torch. You've at least collected them, haven't you?
Yeah. So the majority of gold torch comes from the Mackay region, very similar location or geographical location to the Scollies, but the torch itself comes from generally quite shallow water, sometimes exposed on low tide. Where the Scollies are usually on the other side of the island, in the deeper water. So that's the normal 24K, and the half bar ones. The half bar ones are usually a little bit deeper. The 24Ks are in like that deep some days. In cans or off cans, where I am, we get the Aussie Gold, which have the green base and the gold stem. You do get the green base and gold stem down at Mackay as well, but the majority of the green base gold stem comes from up here. And both of those are found out of reef. I don't know of anything that's found inshore. But definitely not brackish and definitely not rivers or anything like that. They might be near.
I thought it was a myth. I knew it.
There could be a few like fringing reefs that are like close to the shore that people have found gold stem on, but certainly the water wouldn't be brackish, that's for sure.
Okay, great. Have you got any care tips for Aussie Gold Torch based on where you find them? Do they need anything different? I mean, do they need whiter light because they're shallow? Is that better for them?
Possibly, yeah. Definitely the high flow. That's something I always find interesting. People or polyp extension, not just applying to torches, but polyp extension is such an interesting topic because if a reefer doesn't see tentacles this long coming out of their hammer or their torch, they think it's unhappy. Whereas the majority of corals in the wild have tentacles hanging out that far, because the waves will nearly rip them clean out of their skeleton if they did come out far. So my theory, I don't know if it's got merit to it, is that in aquariums, the longer polyps mean they're kind of stretching for light. So, like to gain more light along the stem. Whereas where you find the gold stems in the shallow water, you're lucky to see just the tips out, the white tips that hang out the top. You just see lots of heads. So it could be a light thing, and it could be a wave and water flow thing. But yeah, I haven't had too much trouble with them until I actually don't have many now. I lost quite a lot. But I had really good success for about 2 years, and then one day the whole lot just dropped. They all went, and there was nothing new added to the system. They all just dropped. So I don't know too much about that.
Right, so you lose torch as well. That's interesting. It's
everyone loses coral. If they say they don't, they're lying.
Yeah.
I
agree, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's how we learn a lot of the time. So
yeah, we definitely do get brown jelly, and the causes of that, without examining it more closely with a microscope or bacterial testing, that the causes of it are always going to be up in the air as well. I've heard Vibrio is one of the causes of brown jelly, but yeah, I'm not too sure as to the causes. But yeah, it can be sporadic. We sometimes get like just one coral. Like we got grids of hundreds of corals all rowed up of the exact same type, like all Montes or torches or hammers or whatever. And one day you'll come in and just one will be brown jellied, just one. And then you see that in a home aquarium somewhere, and you'll see the panic set in from reefers. Get it out, siphon it out, and it'll infect everything. And I'm like, well, I haven't seen that yet, but I have seen it in a home aquarium. Reefing's so weird. It keeps everyone on their toes.
Absolutely. If it was easy, we'd probably get bored and move on to something else, wouldn't we? So
yeah, that's it.
So back to the subject of the exposed corals, because I'm fascinated by this, because we don't see this. Obviously, I actually live by the sea in the UK, and it's tidal, but there aren't corals. So for us to kind of get our heads around which corals are exposed and for how long and to the conditions, so my questions would be, do all corals get exposed, or it's the ones in the shallow water, but are there certain species that are exposed daily? Are there certain species that could not survive being exposed? Do they get rained on? Do they get sun? Do they get wind?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about
that? So one of my favorite little patches of local reef, it's about 40 minutes drive north of me, and it's accessible from the beach. And on very low tides, you can walk right out about 1 kilometre, and there is corals everywhere. I've found hammers, I've found leather corals of all kinds, lots of different favias and little maze type corals like goniaster and all that. Goni, lots of goni, lots of different types of acro, heaps. But yeah, so I think a lot of corals, a lot of genus have the potential to be exposed, but there are certain species within those that certainly would never be exposed. Echinata, Acropora echinata especially. I don't think an Acropora would ever be exposed, ever, because they're just found too deep. There would be quite a few species that would never ever see air or oxygen in its raw form or anything like that. But I think a lot of corals get rained on. They have wind. We have blistering hot sun, like 42-degree hot heat days, and there's a low tide, and it's a very sad day for a lot of those corals. They hate it. but they slime up and it's disgusting. And when the tide comes in, all the brown foam washes up. It's disgusting, and it stinks. You know that acro smell that you're talking about. It's everywhere. The whole beach is covered in it on those low tides. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of corals that can be exposed and are exposed at least once a month because like the tide cycles, as you know, aren't always super super low. So it's not always that they're exposed, but
Sure.
some of them are exposed a lot.
And how long would they be exposed for? Are we talking hours?
Some are, yeah. Some are exposed for hours, especially if they're at the top of the normal low tide, and then it's a super low tide, and it goes out for another hour, and then it stays still, and then it has to come back in. So it could be at least 2 hours completely dry. Well, they're not dry; they're wet with their slime, but yeah, they're dry.
No, it's interesting. It takes me back to, when I first got into the hobby a long time ago in the 90s. People used to say, don't take corals out of the water. And now we chop them with bandsaws, we use super glue, and it turns out they've been out of the water the whole time for millennia, So it's interesting what you learn. Um, what else were we going to discuss? So they call you Shane Danger Coleman, Shane. So you're a little bit wacky, as some of your followers may know. You've got a tattoo for Cade Aquariums on your leg.
Yeah. I don't know if I can. I might be able to show you.
Tell us about
It's it's a bit hard to show you. Yeah. So, basically, there's a bit of a
I think it was good causes though, wasn't it?
yeah. It's a bit of a sad story actually. So a few months ago, a really good friend of mine, Cam, found out that their daughter, Josie, she's only 2, or she's not quite 2 yet, was diagnosed with a really rare form of cancer. And it was done on a bit of a fundraiser. So I auctioned off some skin, and the Australian, well, Cade, Adam, he donated a pretty sizable sum. He did actually tell me I could get anything I wanted, but because it came from Adam, I decided to get Cade on my leg. But yeah, it's the diagnosis isn't actually looking good for Josie at the moment, and it looks like she might grow her wings. So it's but yeah, the funds raised went to sort of give the family some extra time with her and whatnot. But yeah, so that's how that came about. Yeah, so people go, oh, why would you want a brand on your leg? It's like, I don't see it as a brand. I see it because did that for a mate. So yeah, it's good. But yeah, I'm also covered in tattoos everywhere. That's tattoos are my thing.
That's
and other crazy stuff.
yes. So I saw you do pottery, and you were making a spectacled angel, a conspic. Last time I looked, how did that go?
Yeah.
Did that turn out okay?
Yeah, that one's gone to its new home. A good friend down in Brisbane, and the rest are actually on display in an art gallery at the moment. I think they're here to the end of the month, and then I've bring them back home or take them to another gallery or something. It's just an interest I've taken up. It's a bit of a release for getting the creative demons out. So yeah, that's the last one. I made a nautilus last night.
Yeah.
I haven't painted it yet or glazed or anything like that. It's still all wet, but yeah, I like nautilus. They're pretty cool. I'd love to be able to one day do a deep sea dive if that's ever possible.
Very cool.
And yeah, I'd love to see nautilus in the wild doing their thing, just bobbing along. Be cool.
Okay, thank you very much. We're drawing near the end of our session. I just want to ask you a bit about, obviously, Jake and Mark used to do the reef therapy. They created it, and I've got a bit of feedback on the last couple that I've done. People are asking where Mark is, and just for the listeners and the viewers, Mark was a very close long-term friend to Jake Adams, who sadly passed away a couple of months ago. And Mark was the first person who I asked, of course, and I didn't want to go near this brand, this thing, and without Mark's blessing. And so he got back to me, and unfortunately, he declined to appear on the show. He's obviously affected heavily, as you might expect, and he wished it all the best for the future. And but it's he declined it. But Shane, you knew Jake, didn't you? And I think did you see each other at Reef Stock?
Yeah, yeah, we've caught up quite a bit. Yeah, we've always spoken quite highly of each other, and I think we first met on the first Reef Stock Australia when you bought Reef Stock over here, and we had a bit to do with each other in events and that kind of thing. And then I went over to Denver not long after to do the Reef Stock Denver with him, and then just recently that. But yeah, no, he's it massive tragedy, and he's everyone in reefing. He's touched everyone in reefing. There's not a single person that doesn't know who Jake is. So it's just a massive loss. And I first heard the news while I was up on holiday, and the last 3 days of that holiday felt a bit down. But still a lot of people are taking it. Heart goes out to Windsor, and it's absolute tragedy. But it's good that the Reef Builders legacy can keep going on. You've got Evan doing a wonderful job at the studio, and then you're taking on Reef Therapy, and hopefully all the old hats are back on board really soon. I have written a few real basic articles for Reef Builders in the past. I may end up start doing it again if I can get some time.
Please.
but it's keeping the Reef Builders legacy alive would be exactly what he wanted. So it's good to see that it's rolling on. Yeah.
Yeah, and massive thanks to you for coming on. I'm so glad you volunteered to come on to Reef Therapy. It's a good link, and like you say, he spoke highly of you to me, so that's great that you're on, and it's great that you knew him. And this legacy, obviously, it's a massive hole, and Evan now has to do the studio on his own. That was a two-man job. Now Evan's busy in the studio, just cleaning and maintaining his big enough, but now he needs to do the videos on his own. And now I've had to take Reef Therapy, and I used to work 1 day a week for Reef Builders, and now I work kind of 7. And I think it's the same for for Evan, and I think Windsor's coming back on, and Ryan behind the scenes, and Marissa who does the Reef Stock show. So obviously this gaping hole, as we've had to kind of patch it together, and we're kind of muddling through it as best we can. So apologies for the kind of lack of flow and rhythm, and that kind of soothing nature of previous Reef therapies. Hopefully we can get there, and it's been a fascinating talk with yourself, Shane, and thanks for coming on the show.
No worries, it's been awesome to be here.
Thank you, and I'll definitely take you up on those article suggestions as well.
All right, see you later.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Shane. Thanks.